Okay. Good evening, everyone. And thank you all for joining us for today's event, Wild Bees in Atlantic Canada, Their Biology, Behavior, and Where to Find Them. My name is Jennifer White, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Nature Conservancy of Canada's Atlantic region, and I will be your moderator today. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional unceded territory of the Wolastoqiyik people. This territory is covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which Wolastoqiyik, Mi'kmaq, and Passamaquoddy people first signed with the British Crown in 1726. The treaties did not deal with surrender of the lands and resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. At NCC, we acknowledge that the work we do across the country is on traditional territories of many Indigenous people. We honor and thank the stewards and traditional inhabitants of this place and recognize the continued presence of Indigenous peoples here today. The Nature Conservancy of Canada is the country's unifying force for nature, working to deliver large-scale permanent land conservation. We are a national charity working to protect the most important natural areas and the species they sustain. Since 1962, NCC and its partners have helped to protect over 14 million hectares, coast to coast to coast. To learn more, visit our website at natureconservancy.ca. NCC has been working with partners in Atlantic Canada since 1971 to help protect over 38,600 hectares. We work collaboratively with communities to help conserve and protect nature. Today, we'll be joined by Jess Vickruck, PhD, entomology research scientist, agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and Jennifer Sullivan, NCC's Newfoundland Stewardship Coordinator. Before we begin the webinar, I would like to quickly go over a few housekeeping topics. We are being joined by people from across the country. You may experience a temporary glitch during the live stream. We thank you in advance for your patience. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will start sharing a link to the webinar we will share a link to the webinar recording after the event, so keep an eye on your inboxes. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with colleagues, friends, and family. We also invite your comments and questions. You will notice a Q&A chat box on your screen. If you think of a question for the speakers at any point, just type it in there. Include who the question is intended for, and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. At this time, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Jess Vickruck is a research scientist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, based in Fredericton, New Brunswick. She completed a Bachelor of Science at the University of Guelph, Master's and PhD degrees at Brock University, and was a postdoctoral scholar at the University of Calgary before joining AAFC in 2019. A lover of insects since childhood, her research largely focuses on increasing beneficial insect biodiversity in agricultural systems. In particular, she is interested in how unused spaces on farms, like shelter belts, wetlands, and field edges, can be used to better support wild bee communities. Jess loves doing research outside and talking about the more than 250 species of wild bee that we have in Atlantic Canada. The floor is yours, Jess.
I have to unmute myself. We're 4 years into this and I still keep forgetting to unmute myself. Amazing. Thank you for the introduction. Holy moly, there are 80 something people in this room that are taking their Tuesday night to listen to about bees. All right, let me see if I can take over the screen here. Whoop. Then I need to share. And then I need to do this. All right, am I in a view that is reasonable for everyone now? Jen, can you see my screen or anyone?
Yep, looks good.
Perfect, all right. I have multiple monitors going and I'm always worried that I have the wrong one up. So yeah, thank you guys all so much for coming. I'm going to try and keep a lid on my storytelling because these are so fabulous and I could talk about them forever. So what I'm going to talk most about today is try and focus in on just some general wild bee biology and a little bit of the specifics of sort of habitat requirements in what bees are have been listed as species of concern or as threatened in Atlantic Canada, and then some ways that we can, as a community, can sort of help to promote wild bee biodiversity in your homes and on your properties and so forth. So this, I always use this image because I love it. I think I put it together during my PhD, but it just gives you a sense of all the different colors and shapes and sizes. These are all wild bees that are native to Canada. So, you know, not just your typical honeybee, but they're green and they're blue and they're shiny and they're fabulous. So across the globe, actually, we have more than 20,000 different species of bee and over 920 in Canada. And this number, I think when I started working on bees, you know, 15 years ago, you know, we were under, I think it was about 850 that we had documented from Canada. So the more we look, you know, there's all this hidden biodiversity that we don't even know is out there because Canada's such a big country and we hadn't really been surveying for bees that much. But I mean, you can see they're fabulous different shapes and sizes. There's blue bees and bees that look kind of like flies and they're so fuzzy. And that biodiversity is everywhere. A lot of times when we think about bees, the first things that come to people's minds are typically honeybees, sometimes bumblebees. And so, you know, you always think about queens and workers, but the overwhelming majority of the bees, of our wild bees, are actually solitary. So more than 70% of the bees globally are solitary. And this just means that it's one female. She does all the work by herself. There are no workers. So she makes all of the trips to go and collect pollen for her offspring, and she does that all by herself. We have your typical social or eusocial bees. So these are bees like your bumblebees and your honeybees. And, you know, if you're in the, you know, further south, your stingless bees. And typically how this works, especially for bumblebees and most other species, is that a single female overwinters by herself. So this is she will become the queen in the spring. And then in the spring, I don't know if you guys can see my pointer or not. In the spring, she emerges and she sort of behaves like a solitary bee for the first little while. She does all the foraging, she lays all the eggs, and then once those eggs hatch and become adults, those become her workers. She stays in the nest, and those new workers now go out and do all of the collecting of pollen for her, and she keeps laying her eggs. And then in the fall, she will start to make males. They'll mate with some special eggs that were laid, which are bees that are destined to become next year's queens. And then those females will overwinter and begin the cycle again. And then there's these really cool species of bee that we know far too little about. And they are parasitic bees, either social parasites or solitary parasites. And they don't collect any of their own pollen at all. They actually sneak into the nests of these other bees while they are out. So in the solitary bee, they'll sneak in and they'll usually eat the egg or the larva, and then lay their own egg on that pollen ball. Or sometimes in the social parasites of the bumblebees, that bee will actually come in, take over, kill the queen, take over the nest, and then make all of that queen's workers work for her. And so they're a really fascinating group of bees as well. So but bees live in a fabulous number of different places. Like I said, most bees live in the ground, and these nests are really sort of inconspicuous. You might not even notice them. You might think that they're anthills, but each of these little dots, these little red arrows, are pointing to a nest of a ground nesting species. I'm not sure which one. But they also nest in twigs, especially here in Atlantic Canada. They love things like rose and sumac and raspberry. So if you've broken off a twig and if you ever break off a twig and you see a little hole in the top, that is almost certainly a small carpenter bee that's made a nest in there. There's bees that also like to nest in rotting wood. There's certain, this is my husband bringing me tea because he's lovely. There's certain species that love to nest in rotting wood, cracks and crevices. There's lots of bees that will nest. I've had people call me because they're nesting in the space between the bricks on their houses. And there's even certain species that nest that are obligate snail shell nesters. So they actually they bring their pollen into a snail shell, and that's where they make their nest. So huge diversity of places where different species of bees will live. Unlike wasps, and we've sort of just passed wasp season, bees are vegetarians, so they solely consume pollen and nectar. So this picture here, this is a large carpenter bee that was part of my PhD work. So this big orange ball is actually a huge pollen ball. So typically this would be 7 or 8 pollen trips, and they bring back this pollen and shape it into a big ball. And then this sort of opaque white thing on the top here, this is the egg. So it's an absolutely humongous egg that gets laid on top of this pollen ball. And this pollen is all the food that this egg will require basically to survive from hatching to adulthood. So it gets its whole amount of food right from the get-go, and it will eat all of that. So we have sort of two groups of bees. We have bees that are generalists and specialists. So the fancy names for those are specialists. We call oligolectic bees. And these are usually bees that will typically only collect pollen from, in the most strict scenario, one species of flower, one species of bee. So that relationship is really tight. But quite often it's a family of flowers or a genus of flowers. And then there's also generalists who will collect pollen from, any flower that's available. So this is one of my opportunities to give you a whole slew of beautiful bee photos. So in terms of bee pollen collection, this happens in a number of ways. There's honeybees and bumblebees are part of a group of bees that are called the corbiculate bees. And they call them that because they have this, you can see this shiny spot on the femur here. And they actually pack pollen into this area, and that's called their corbicula. But that's only specific to one group of bees. A lot of bees just have these special pollen collecting hairs, which are called scopa, and they're essentially branching. It's a branching hair. If you put it under a microscope, it kind of looks like a Christmas tree. So you have sort of one main stalk and then all these branches, and the pollen sticks to it. So, I mean, this bee is absolutely coated in pollen, and that's not unusual for some of these bees that have these pollen collecting hairs all over their bodies. Some groups of bees have fancy abdominal scopa. So my children think this is great. They collect pollen on the undersides of their butt. So most of their pollen actually comes out over here, and you'll see them flying. Sometimes you can see these bees flying around, and you'll notice that the underside of their abdomen is bright yellow. That's because they're covered in pollen. And then you have bees like this bee, who really doesn't look much like a bee at all. This is a collated bee, and it actually doesn't collect pollen on its body at all. It ingests it, so it eats it, and then when it gets back to the nest, it regurgitates it. So all kinds of different mechanisms to gather that pollen. When I talk about or think about trying to enhance habitat or promote habitat for bees, we often talk or think about what bees need, and it's break it down into 3 sort of simple components. They need food, and they need food all year. So they need flowers that are in bloom throughout the season from spring until fall. And that's really critical. There's quite often lots of floral availability in the summer, but it's those spring flowers and those fall flowers that are really important. They need safe and available real estate, nesting sites basically. And particularly in the system that I work in an agricultural system, this is one of the big things, especially because we have so many ground nesting bees. So you can imagine that in a potato production system, or in a wheat production system, or a canola production system, that constant disturbance of the ground, destroys any nests that were made there. And then the other thing that's really important is a short commute. So pairing those 2 things together, the food and the real estate. So you can think about it as, the time you spend in your car to get to work every day. Bees are central place foragers. We are central place foragers. We put a lot of effort and resources into our home where we live. They build a nest. They put a big investment into that nest, and then they fly out to flowers and come back. So you can imagine that the longer they have to fly to get to that flower, the fewer trips they're going to be able to make, the fewer babies or offspring they're going to be able to produce. And in the case of solitary species, you can imagine that the longer a female is gone from that nest, the more opportunity that nest has to be parasitized by other bees, but also by other insects that may be looking to eat the offspring or to take over that space. So I mentioned we have 927 different species so far. I mean, that's an estimate in Canada, and they come from 5 different families. There is the Halictidae, which are, I think if you Google it, they're often called sweat bees, which is a funny name, but it's because they will often land on your, if you're quite sweaty in the summer, they'll land on you and they'll sort of lick off the salt off of your bodies. These are quite often ground nesters. They can be beautiful colors, and they're very, very common. We also have andrenids. So this is actually a cute little andrena male in my backyard. These are often called mining bees. They typically nest in the ground. They're very often early season bees, so they're active quite early in the season. They're very intrepid. They get out there when it's quite chilly still in the spring. So the Apidae, so this includes honeybees and bumblebees, but also other groups of bees like small carpenter bees. So this is a bee that I studied a lot for my master's. They're spectacular blue bees. They nest only in twigs and stems, but they can't dig in from the side of the stem. They have to have the twig broken off. So they need that pithy center. So they love rose bushes, raspberries, sumac, things like that. And then there's the Megachilidae. These are mason and leafcutter bees. So the leafcutter bees actually line the insides of their nest with leaf pieces. So if you ever look out in your garden and you see that there is a bush and it looks like it has all these sort of like perfect semicircles cut out of it, that's almost certainly a leafcutter bee that's been using the nesting, using the leaves as nesting material. So that's kind of a good hint, if you don't see the bee itself, the evidence that that bee was there. And then there are the Calididae, which are those bees that look kind of like wasps, and they ingest their pollen. These bees are really neat. They sometimes call them polyester bees because they line the inside of their nest. It almost looks like cellophane. It's this very thin substance that they secrete from, they have glands that they secrete it, but it actually has antimicrobial properties and smells kind of like lemon. Weird things that you smell when you're out there. So yeah, in Atlantic Canada, we have more than 250 species of bee. This is an approximation because there's huge parts that are under-surveyed. And the more we look, the more we find. Like I said, most of them are solitary. More than 70% of them are solitary, with some social and parasitic species. And then, like you can see, we have quite a few bees that are polylectic. So those are your generalist bees. Some that are oligolectic, so more specialized on certain families of flowers, and 76 that we actually don't have any floral reported associations for. So that gives you a sense of how much data we are missing or how much data we don't necessarily have on a lot of the species of wild bee that we have in Atlantic Canada. So this is a conservation group, and so I wanted to sort of highlight some of the species that are at risk or are threatened in Atlantic Canada. So this one is interesting. So these images are all taken from Bumblebee Watch, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. But the Rusty Patch Bumblebee, actually, if you look at the distribution map in the center here, if you're very keen, you'll notice that it doesn't actually range up into New Brunswick. But if you look at the species at risk site for Canada, it's listed. And I think we've gotten some calls of asking if we've seen them here. And I think this is one of those things that with climate change and with the warming temperatures, wouldn't be surprised if they started to range up into New Brunswick. We're awful close there. So this is a bee that used to be super common in the 70s and is now really, really quite rare and is endangered in Canada. Whoops, did I go too far? Yeah. We have the yellow banded bumblebee. So this is Bombus terricola. So it's of special concern. This one actually, it's not super common, but I see this one. It is still around. It's again one of those that was really, really common and it's becoming less common. And so it's being watched. But you can see it has a huge range from east to west, sort of a very prolific species. Easy to identify. It's often called the half black bumblebee because the front half of its thorax is yellow and the back half is black. Oh, I love tea. We have Bombus bohemicus. So this is an exceedingly rare bee. If you look on iNaturalist, I don't think there's a single record of it. It's historically been found here, but it's very, very, very rare. And it's a cuckoo bumblebee. So it's one of those social parasites that sneak into the nest and take over other bees' nests. And often we see that these cuckoo bumblebees are one of the first groups to show declines, probably because they have to be able to find their hosts. And then lastly is the Suckley's cuckoo bumblebee, another one of those super rare. It says it's threatened, or it's listed as threatened. I've never seen one in real life. Is another parasitic species that ranges way, way across Canada. And so I'm sort of flipping through these, but I'll tell you why in a second. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I've now given you, I'll look at that way. I've now sort of talked about forest bees that are at risk, and they're all bumblebees. And that isn't because other bees probably aren't at risk. It's because we just don't have enough information. And it's the bumblebees are the large charismatic things that people notice. So it's, I think, really important to think about that it's a lack of information that is probably leading to this focus on bumblebees being threatened and endangered. So what we can do, Facebook clearly knows that I seem to like talking about bees and pollinator gardens because I saw this meme the other day and it made me laugh. So, one of the big things to sort of help promote pollinator biodiversity, or around your house or wherever you are, is to just let things be a little bit messy, and it's just making less work for yourself. Embrace the messiness. Things like you don't have to rake up your leaves, or let them at least leave them in your gardens so that they're there for the bees, because a lot of those, especially those like bumblebee queens and those ground nesters, they want that cover for the winter. If you trim your raspberries or your roses, or don't trim the twigs all the way down, leave 20 to 30 centimeters, and those will probably almost all be occupied by bees the next year. They love those. And the thing that happens after that is those carpenter bees will use the nest for 1 year. And then once they're done, then spiders move in, then other biodiversity moves into those spaces. So that's a big one. Reduce mulch use, which I know can be a touchy subject because people like mulch because it's less work for them in the garden, but we're going to let it be messy anyway, so it's okay. The thing with mulch is that if you imagine a ground nesting bee trying to get into their nest, if there is, a couple inches of mulch on top, it makes it really difficult. They either won't nest there because they won't see it as a suitable nesting site, or they won't, if you mulch over top of where their nest was, they won't be able to get back to it. And then think about what you're planting. Thinking about having flowers across the season from early to late, and more trying to think about if it's possible to put native plants in there. So there's been numerous studies that have shown that that relationship between native bees and native plants is really strong because they've co-evolved together. So for those specialist bees, they're only going to visit the plants that are their host. But even for the generalist bees will visit native plants in higher numbers than they will visit non-native plants. So just something to think about. Oftentimes, local botanical gardens will have plant sales, and you can look and you'll see which ones are native plants. So just something to think about if you're adding to your garden or looking to expand. So that was the flip. I actually stole this picture from the Nature Conservancy of Canada, which I thought was probably okay since I'm here. But yeah, not this. We want this. You want to, and these gardens that are so lovely. You can just hear the bees humming through them. They make me so happy. I always am happy to answer questions, but people always ask me about, I talk about planting stuff. These are two excellent resources. So this is the Northern Gardener's Guide to Native Plants and Pollinators. This is a very recent edition this year. There was a version that was more for the Southern Ontario sort of group, but this book it's my favorite book. It has associations of it has flowers and what bees have been known to visit them. It has suggestions for how to put gardens together and what plants pair well together. So it's a fabulous resource. I give it to lots of people as gifts for Christmas. And then one thing that just came out this year was called, which I thought was great. It's called Grow Me Instead. So, using native plants. So if you're looking to plant this plant, that's a non-native plant. What you could plant instead, that would be a native plant and prevent invasive species. So those are two really good. I'm happy to provide the links for them after too as well. So other ways to get involved if you are so keen. Probably one of the most amazing resources we have in Canada is called Bumblebee Watch. So there's an app now you can download, but it is a website that people submit photos of bumblebees and experts review them and identify them and add them to a global database, and it's being used to monitor bee populations all over Canada, North America, really. So it's this incredible resource that's been going on for 7 or 8 years now. Just a fabulous thing. iNaturalist and Seek, which you guys probably know about, but the Seek app is a favorite in our house. You can take pictures of things and upload them. It's great if you have kids. They have challenges. So it's a really wonderful resource as well to bring out with you into the world. And I think I'm now officially over all of my time. Hopefully I haven't blasted through things too quickly, but thank you guys all for listening to me, and I will turn it over to Jen.
Thank you so much, Jess. That was amazing. I learned so much about bees in such a short period of time. I didn't know there was a bee that smelled like lemon, and certainly that we have so many different species of bees in Canada and in Atlantic Canada. And I really appreciate your insights on the fact that we don't know a lot about bees, and there may be many more bees that would be on that list of species at risk if it wasn't for the lack of survey effort, I guess. So really, lots of excellent insights there and resources. Thank you.
No problem.
So our next speaker today is Jennifer Sullivan. Jennifer Sullivan is the stewardship coordinator for the Nature Conservancy of Canada in Newfoundland and Labrador. Born and raised in St. John's, Newfoundland, Jennifer spent much of her childhood camping, hiking, and sailing around the island portion of the province, fostering a deep-seated love of nature that led her to NCC. Jennifer has a Bachelor's of Science and a Master's of Science from Memorial University, where she studied non-native plant species establishment on the island of Newfoundland. Jennifer joined the NCC team in 2020 and loves that her role allows her to work with a variety of passionate people to conserve beautiful rugged landscapes of the island of Newfoundland and Labrador for the next generation to enjoy as we can today. Whenever you're ready, Jen.
Thank you, Jen. For the fantastic presentation. I feel honestly like I know so much about bees in Atlantic Canada now. As Jen mentioned, my name is Jennifer Sullivan. I'm presenting today from St. John's, Newfoundland, or Uktahumguk, which is the unceded traditional territory of the Beothuk and Mi'kmaq. I'd also like to acknowledge Labrador as the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Innu of Nitassinan, the Inuit of Nunatsiavut, and the Inuit of Nunatukavut. Since we just had a brilliant overview of bee biology from Jess, I thought I would focus my talk on supporting pollinator conservation. Did my slides switch for you guys?
No, we still see the title slide.
Hmm. Why is that happening now? There we go. Okay.
Yep.
Not used to Zoom, although I should be. Okay. As a quick overview of what Jess shared with us, native pollinators such as bees need a dependable food source to survive. Their food comes from flowering plants that provide nectar and pollen. This includes many of our native Atlantic species of trees, such as cherry and maple, shrubs such as sheep laurel and blueberry, and forbs, which are herbaceous plant species, such as goldenrod, aster, fireweed, and raspberry. These native flowering species provide excellent sources of nutrients for pollinators. In addition to food sources, pollinators also need shelter for nests and hibernation. So some of the major threats to our native pollinators are pesticides, which are used for crops and used in crops cultivation and in gardens. Introduced diseases such as deformed wing disease, which is actually introduced by honeybees. Climate change, which impacts natural ranges of pollinators and their food. And unfortunately, habitat loss, alteration, or fragmentation. The loss of habitat can significantly limit food supply and safe areas for these species to rest and breed, while fragmentation can impact the travel distance from home to food source, as Jess stressed in her presentation. So, to protect pollinators like bees, we must conserve that land that they use. By protecting natural areas, we are ensuring that these species have food to eat and shelter to create a home. Although the Nature Conservancy of Canada uses a landscape-based approach to conservation, meaning we focus on areas of unique habitat and high biodiversity, many pollinators tend to benefit from the land that we protect. So what does this land look like? Well, this land can look like many of the areas that NCC actually currently protects, from small to large. But ideally, they are large protected areas of diverse habitat and biodiversity that will benefit from no longer being disturbed or fragmented, such as in this picture here, Newfoundland and Labrador's Grand Cadre Estuary Nature Reserve, which borders on a estuary, contains riparian areas, wetlands, mature mixed wood forests, some barren areas as well, or coastal areas of salt marshes such as St. Peter's Harbor on Prince Edward Island, and remote rugged areas such as Briar Island in Nova Scotia. There are also instances where non-native species make up a habitat that can support native pollinator populations. An example of this is Champer's Bluff in New Brunswick. Um, in addition to its impressive hemlock stands, Champer's Bluff also contains an area of old fields. These fields are managed for bobolink, which is a species of bird that is listed as special concern by the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada. Because of this, these fields containing both native and non-native flowering plants will be left as they are to support not only this listed bird, but our native pollinators as well. So what are some of the things that we all can do to help support pollinator populations? Jess did a fantastic job of highlighting ways to help support bees in her presentation. A few of these items might be repeated, but I think that they're important to share. I'll repeat them again just in case. Well, we can provide a food source for pollinators by planting diverse native plants in our home gardens. Non-native plants are also fine, but are sometimes bred for beauty and may lack in nutritional value. Also, avoiding pesticide use in your home and gardens is very important. If you are concerned about your plants being eaten by pests or losing your vegetables in your garden, you could try planting a more biodiverse garden to attract natural pest predators. Providing access to nesting sites is also a great way to support pollinators. Just highlighted the different kind of nesting areas for various species. So for ground nesting bees, giving them access to bare earth without too much lawn or mulch or paved surfaces is really helpful. For cavity nesting bees, the hollow pithy stems of plants, avoiding trimming the dead stems in your garden in the fall and wait until the next spring after the bees have woken up. Um, you can also get involved in monitoring these species while hiking or exploring nearby parks, or even in your own backyard, to help track populations using apps like the app that Jess mentioned, and also iNaturalist. And of course, you can continue to get involved by donating to and volunteering with organizations like NCC who continue to protect these vital habitats. NCC annually hosts a nationwide BioBlitz in the summer, um, and have even hosted butterfly survey events in the past. Might be just kind of a natural segue into future other pollinator surveys and maybe even a bee survey, who knows. But those are just some ways that you can get involved. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Jen. Really appreciate your time today, and grateful that you're able to share your NCC experience with us. And really appreciate speaking about how to get involved and how to what the different things are that individuals can do to help, from supporting organizations to getting out there and planting native plants in your own yard, and being involved in different events like bio blitzes and this type of thing. So all kinds of different ways to get involved if that's of interest. So thank you so much for sharing your information, and both of you for the beautiful pictures as well. So what we're going to do next is we have several questions that have come in and submitted by the audience. And so as a reminder, if you have a question that you have not yet submitted, please enter it using the Q&A chat box feature and let us know who the question is for, and we will get to as many questions as time allows. So here we go. I am going to start with the questions. It's great that we do have some questions here, so that's awesome. All right, first question. What is the host? So this one is for Jess. What is the host species for Suckley's cuckoo? And there's more than one question in this question. It's one of those tricky ones. So I'll read the whole thing, and then you can feel free to answer what you like there. Actually, this is longer than I thought. I think I'm just going to read one at a time. So what is the host species for Suckley's cuckoo?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's one of those things, it's super, super rare. So they have documented host associations in Western Canada with Bombus occidentalis. They don't actually know for sure what the host is in the east, but they suspect that it's probably Bombus terricola because they tend to co-occur in most spaces. But I don't think it's ever actually been documented. So that's probably not helping Suckley's cuckoo, because if Bombus terricola is also declining, if its host is declining, then the social parasite is going to have an even harder time finding it.
Yeah, exactly. Just like the lynx and the rabbit and or the hare and the the cycles and all that. So okay. Next question. Do all types of bee have a stinger? And why do they sting you?
So I think I almost always get that question. Um, so fun fact, only female bees have stingers. Male bees do not have stingers because the stinger is a modified egg ovipositor, egg laying device. So males don't have those. Um, all female bees do technically have stingers. Depending on this, I mean, some of the little sweat bees are only a centimeter long. And so their stinger is sized proportionally. So like a sweat bee female could try and sting me, but if it was in, you know, like a thicker part of my skin, the stinger wouldn't actually make it through. um, so yeah, they have stingers. Honestly, almost, almost, well, not all the time, but the overwhelming majority of stings that we see are usually wasps. So I mean, the only a female bee might sting you if you stepped on her nest. Usually it's only in a defense mechanism. You know, I say that, you know, bees are vegetarians, so they're not interested in you. Wasps tend to be more aggressive because wasps are hunters, so they actually feed wasp babies eat things like aphids and caterpillars and things like that. So you know, those wasp females are hunting and bringing back bits of, you know, your hamburger to their babies, whereas as bees, they just, you know, they want a salad. So they're inherently very unaggressive, non-aggressive.
Interesting. That's great. Thank you. And more questions. Is Bumblebee Watch linked to iNaturalist? Or is there a way to move Bumblebee observations over to iNaturalist? And I don't know which one of you are more familiar with that, but
I don't know the answer to that question. I've never tried to do it.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm sorry, Meredith, I don't know.
Yeah, no worries. You know, we can certainly try to track that down and maybe get back another time, but
yeah, I'm gonna go look after if there's a way to like to import multiple records into. They're not linked, but you may be able to like mass download a whole bunch of records and then import them all at one time. But they're not linked to one another.
Right. Yeah. I could see the benefit of them being able to at least share that data if there's different
yeah, like if you had a whole bunch of records,
data
so have to do them all individually. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Are bee boxes a good thing to use in my yard? Next question.
Oh, so I don't know who asked this question. When you say bee boxes, do you mean the ones with the little holes, or do you mean like the one that sort of looks like a bird nest that's for bumblebees? I don't know. Did people have the power to either? Okay. It was my okay. So there's mixed reviews. So there are bumblebee boxes that you can make that are there are bumblebee boxes, and they sort of look like almost like little birdhouses. They're usually wooden boxes that have like a little hole, and you tend to bury them in the ground with a little plastic tube. And they're really fun. It usually takes, we found when I was in Alberta and we were working with those, that it almost took 2 or 3 years before they became attractive. The females didn't like the smell of that new wood. Like once it sort of got older and didn't smell new anymore. The bumblebee trap, so those are called trap nests, the little circle ones. So they vary. Good ones, I think, are beneficial. You have to clean them out every year. Sometimes, you know, like you see the ones at Costco and they have these huge holes that are, you know, 2 centimeters across. There aren't any bees that are going to use those. And there have been some studies that show that they tend to get preferentially used by invasive species and wasps and not native bees. So I think they're probably not harmful, but you could do more good in other ways. that
Right.
makes sense.
Right.
Yeah. You'd be
They're,
better
they're
off to, yeah, you'd be better off to have a rose bush and trim a bunch of your rose bush and leave those sticks
right.
open than to go and buy a bee box.
Okay. Okay. Sounds like there's a few parallels there with bird boxes in terms of like having to clean them out every year and that type of thing, and sometimes unintended uses, but
Yeah, and then there was one study that showed that they actually, because the trap nest boxes basically, even if they're inhabited by native bees, they're so highly parasitized because one of the parasites, finds the box, and then it's, like Christmas, because all the nests are so close together that the success rate of those nests it can be low. So there's mixed thoughts on those.
right, right. Okay. Um, what's your favorite bee plant slash one you have in your yard?
In my yard. See, I love willows, but I don't have any of those in my yard. But if we need to get some willows. Early season flowering shrubs, generally speaking, are awesome. Because they're super important early season flowers. And because they're usually at that time of year, there's not a lot flowering. When they bloom, you can just stand next to them and you can just watch them hum with various species of bee. And it's great.
Awesome. Awesome. We have another question here. What are some of the non-Indigenous plants, insects, or vertebrates that kill native bees most?
Oof. Sorry, what are the non-Indigenous? So they're not,
This
the
is one
plants
of
are
those many questions in a question.
okay. Oh, here I found it. In the, so like a non-Indigenous plant won't kill a bee. It just probably won't support them to the same number of bees to the same level that a native species would. And some of the ornamentals have been bred so that they don't have pollen or nectar anymore. So the floral rewards are not there. That being said, they're not toxic. They're not going to kill the bee. Insects are vertebrates.
Does the bee, sorry, I probably shouldn't jump in here, but does the bee take waste time and energy looking in those
Yeah, they might.
types of
Yeah.
plants if there's nothing, but there's no reward? Like,
Yeah, if they're very showy, they might. They usually learn pretty quickly. They'll go to a few flowers and then move on. Um, in terms of insects or vertebrates, I have a really good answer for that one. I mean, most, insectivores eat insects, not necessarily aren't necessarily bee specific. Um, well, I mean, here's the honest answer: humans. We probably kill them the most. Anyway, yeah.
yeah, by far. Okay, great. I have one for Jen here. Can you tell us more about the BioBlitz and how can I get involved?
Absolutely, yeah. So it is a national BioBlitz that NCC organizes every end of July, early August. So usually we put that out on our social media and on our Facebook page, and we send out. Usually we send out, I think, Jen, an email invite to our volunteers as well, to our current volunteers to include them in that. But I would look out on NCC's events webpage in the summer and to get involved in that. And you can get involved in whatever capacity you would like, in whatever area you would like. You can keep it to your home base, or you can explore, your urban nature, or kind of get right into it and go out into one of NCC's nature reserves, or it doesn't have to be an NCC nature reserve either, but it's an awesome way to collect uh, species data across the country, and it's really important, and that data is used by a lot of different organizations as well. There are also sometimes local BioBlitzes that you can get involved in. Those aren't annual. They kind of depend on if we acquire a new property and we want to kind of get volunteers out there looking for species. But I would look out on the volunteer webpage for those as well, because those are generally in person in groups. And we have experts come out with us into the field sometimes that can kind of help guide anyone who is wanting to learn in those situations.
Thank you. We might have time for a couple more here. How many
There
bees
are
are?
a lot.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to as many as we can here. How many bees are found in the St. John's area of Newfoundland and Labrador, and where can I find a list with a description or ways to identify them?
That is a great question. I don't know, Jess, if you know, I do have a link that I'll share in the chat that I actually just kind of found online. And it was done by the Barry Hicks at the College of the North Atlantic in Carbonear, Newfoundland and Labrador. And it has some great ID images. I think it's called Bees of Insular Newfoundland. I'm just going to pop it into the chat, and that's what I can kind of contribute to that. I don't know, Jess, if you have anything else that you want to add to that.
That's good. No, I'm looking at it now. This is cool. So first part that was about bees. So that's a good resource. There is a website called Discover Life. I can pop that link into the chat, but it has keys, dichotomous keys that we use, like the scientists use. But I mean, the general public can use them too. Usually your limitation is whether or not you have access to a microscope to see some of the characters. But they have keys for almost all of the bees in Canada. And they are lucid keys, so you can specify what region you're in and it will limit it to the species that are found in that region. It wouldn't be as fine scale as bees of St. John's. It would be bees in Newfoundland, but I can pop that. I'll find that. But it's a fabulous resource for all things bee, sort of certainly across Canada and the United States. And was there the second part of that about a collection? Was there something about? No.
Just a description of ways to identify.
Okay. Yeah, and I think there's actually, so my colleague Sean McCann, who's the entomologist at AAFC in St. John's, I have to be careful because I'm in New Brunswick, and so there's a very strict distinction between St. John and St. John's. But there was a historic collection that was actually was collected by a scientist in Newfoundland. It's a Newfoundland insect collection, but somehow ended up in Edmonton. I think that person moved and they didn't have the cabinet space. And so all of those insects have been out there for a long time, and they're trying to repatriate them back to Newfoundland. So that process is actually in the works, but I know that the insects aren't back yet, but hopefully soon. At the museum.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be cool. So I guess kind of related, there's a question whether there's a good field guide to bees of Atlantic Canada. And I know the resource that you gave was sort of pollinator and plants and whatnot, which includes bees, of course. But I guess the question was if there was one that existed that was just for bees of Atlantic Canada. Not
No.
yet, right?
That would be awesome.
Okay.
There was actually an honors student, maybe at CBU, that did for her honors thesis, I think did like a bees of Cape Breton that I think is available like publicly. It was pretty cool, I think. You can find it.
Hey. Does leaving dead stalks of flowers for bees to overwinter also provide a habitat for unwanted insects?
For unwanted insects?
Unwanted insects.
There's not much evidence for that. We have questions for that from farmers specifically about providing set-asides for pollinators and for other beneficial insects, and whether or not that's also hosting pest insects that they don't want. And there's not a lot of evidence to support that. Typically higher, you might get a couple of insects that aren't native, but you would be supporting so many more that were, that that trade-off is oh, someone has an Oliver's Guide to Bumblebees of Newfoundland. Cool. Well, that's a direct message.
I think we maybe have time for one more here. And certainly if there's any resources that we want to keep sharing in the chat or following up later, that's an option as well. So this last question for either presenter: for ground nesting bees, thoughts on using plants as green mulch, for example, wild strawberries, or should we leave some bare ground?
What do you think, Jen?
Sorry, can you repeat that, Jen? I was reading another question in the chat.
Yep, sure. So for ground nesting bees, what are your thoughts on using plants as a green mulch, for example, wild strawberries, or should we leave some bare ground?
I mean, I think leaving some bare ground is great. I know that Jess had mentioned also leaving some leaf debris in the fall as well. So I don't know if that would be kind of similar to that, where it might provide nice, snug little hibernation spots for some species.
Yeah, I mean, I think putting a thick layer of mulch on top is one thing, but having, and a lot of that, in different topic, but I have lots of friends that work in carbon sequestration as well. And, letting that stay on the soil and decompose is also really helpful. So in terms of the ground nesters, there's some that like I think that picture that I showed, they were nesting in grass. So some species prefer more ground cover than others. It's when you put a substrate on top of the ground that they can't get through. So in that kind of situation, they'd probably be able to eat their way out or to find their way back through little cracks and crevices, because wouldn't be a total blanket. So I think it would be fine.
Great, thank you. Well, that's all the time we have today for questions. If we didn't get to your question, if you have something else that you would like to ask of any of the panelists or have a topic for a future webinar, please reach out to us at events@natureconservancy.ca. For updates on future webinars and events in your area, check out our events page at natureconservancy.ca/events, and please stay tuned for the link's webinar recording. Before we leave, I would like to welcome Ginny McDonald, one of the wonderful volunteers on the Atlantic Regional Board based in New Brunswick. Having returned to Atlantic Canada after an outstanding career and working around the world and across Canada. Over to you, Ginny.
Wow. That's quite a compliment. Thank you. I'm just trying to get my video going. For some reason. Start video. There we go. I should be on there now. Am I there? Yes. I'm not on my screen. So view, gallery, that'll probably do it. Okay. I just wanted to thank everyone, the volunteers and the speakers, and especially the audience that's come in. I didn't know an awful lot about bees, but this is pretty much a wow. So I really want to thank the folks that have come in, the volunteers for Nature Conservancy, for actually doing the great work that they do. I discovered the Conservancy when I lived out in Alberta, and they had a very quiet, strong reputation of being a very reputable organization that was under the radar, conserving a lot of properties for both the flora and fauna. And we've just heard a little bit about it here, both from Jen and from Jess, from two different points of view, with Jen's coming from the Conservancy side and Jess is coming from the Government of Canada with her role. So I wanted to thank the both of them for such a well-informed presentation. Our MC, Jennifer, who is the Atlantic Community Engagement Coordinator. I'm sorry, I have some notes to guide me. So you'll see the eyes rove a bit. Make sure I get it right. She's the coordinator for the Nature Conservancy of Canada. So I want to thank her for being able to go through those questions, which I wish we'd had more time for, because some of them actually brought questions up in my mind as well as we were reading through there. Yes, Mark, you have your hand up.
I think he's just applauding.
Oh, okay, because I can see the hand going up. What is that about, right? So one thing I wanted to say is that the presentations were really, really good. And the one thing that I noticed when I first moved back to Fredericton, I had an opportunity to rebuild my backyard. It's not huge. So I put a cement patio in. Uh-oh. But what I did is I lined it with native rose bushes. The first summer that I was able to sit in amongst these roses, and there's lots of them because I did two sides of the patio, it was like the whole world was humming. And it was all the bees, and you could hear their wings as they were just working away from flower to flower to flower. So that really brought that home to me. So because I won't take up any more time, I'm not the expert. I'd also like to thank the thousands of donators who have supported our volunteer programs with events like this, or out in the field when we've had our volunteers go out. If you have an opportunity, and if it works in your budget, then it would be really helpful if you could find a way to part with some of your funds to support these causes, whether it's bees or butterflies, or whether it's the grasses, to refurbish St. Peter's Beach in Prince Edward Island. Saw those this year. 300 plugs they had to put in to repair the dunes, or help repair the dunes from Fiona. So if you do this, if you're able to afford, even if it's $5, if you're able to afford, and you can do it on Giving Tuesday, or get hold of one of the organizers here, if that date doesn't work for some reason, I'm sure they'll figure something out for you. But Giving Tuesday, we can double the impact. We have matching funds that are set up from the Patton Family Foundation. They will match the first $25,000 that is donated to NCC in Atlantic Canada. That'll support the bees and the information we don't have yet. So we want to accelerate this pace of conservation. And of course, this is the best way to do it. We want to work on the twin crises of the biodiversity loss and the climate change. Fiona took its toll. So by bookmarking the link in the chat and giving next Tuesday, that will certainly help move this process forward. And for all my fellow volunteers, please stay online and you'll be automatically moved to the volunteer question section. Thank you for your time and your patience with myself and my fumbling. Appreciate that. Bye.